Welcome back everyone. Hi, if you're new, I'm Tori, and today we're going to be getting into some of the worst books that I read in 2023. A lot of these books are actually going to overlap with a video I did previously just talking about series I'm going to be DNFing. So yeah, if you've seen that series DNF video, you're going to see some of the same books on this list, but I'm going to go into a little more detail in this video about why I really disliked these books this year. And one of them is just one of my least favorite books that I've read in the last couple of years. I don't typically include disclaimers in my videos, but when I am doing, worst books of the year, disappointing books of the year, I do like to include the disclaimer that this is just my opinion and this says nothing about who you are as a reader if you love these books. We have different opinions. That is the beauty of reading, and I'm really happy you like these. They just didn't work for me. If a book pops up on this list that you did love, don't be afraid to get down in the comments. Tell me that you love that book. I would love to hear another perspective on it. And just remember that we're just all here for a good time. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let's get into it. Book making my worst books of 2023 list is a book I actually DNF'd, but I feel like I made it far enough into the book where I can include it on this list, and that is 11th Cycle by Canon EOS. This has been getting some buzz in the fantasy community lately. This is a self-published grimdark epic fantasy story. I really thought I was going to enjoy this, and I really did not. I had a physical copy of this, but I ended up unhauling it. I think it was about 800 pages though, and I made it about 400 pages into this book before I just could not do it anymore and had to put the book down. We have 4 different POVs that we're following. There is a 5th one that we get every now and then, but there are 4 like core POVs, and I just really thought all of them were kind of bland, to be perfectly honest. And the story does take a long time to get going. It's very slow moving. Almost 400 pages, and I was still feeling like nothing was really happening. This is the kind of book where you can definitely tell it's building up to something, but just from those 400 pages I've read, I just did not feel like that journey to get to that point, however explosive it was going to be, was worth it. These characters to me were just incredibly flat. They just weren't interesting enough for nothing to be really going on. And the more I kept reading this, the more I was feeling like all of these dark things were just kind of being dumped onto our characters in favor of actual character development. I definitely recognize that self-publishing is not easy, so I do want to preface that before I say that I think this could have used another round of editing. I was encountering some typos here and there, grammatical errors, phrases that weren't really used correctly. I don't know what else to say about it. It wasn't for me. Next on this list is Sinlin Ascends by Josiah Bancroft, and this is the first book in the Books of Babel series. I gotta say, this is probably the last time I will ever talk about Sinlin Ascends. I really do not like this book. I think of all the books that I've read this year, this is by far my least favorite. Maybe my least favorite of the last couple of years, and that's saying a lot considering that I read Book of Night last year. I finished this book and I asked myself, did I just read the same thing as everyone else? Because there's no way. Like, I refuse to believe I had the same book cover to cover. This book is so boring to the point of it being like frustrating almost. Just, it makes you upset because the premise is so incredible. I talked about this book in my series DNF, but even now I am still struggling to wrap my head around why this book is so uninteresting. If you guys aren't familiar, the whole premise is the Tower of Babel is like this big phenomenon, this big marvel in the world, and Sinlin is a professor and he thinks he knows so much about the tower, and he's recently married, so Sinlin and his wife go to the Tower of Babel for their honeymoon. Before they even make it into the tower, his wife goes missing, and so now Sinlin goes into the tower and he's ascending all of these floors trying to find out what happened to his wife. But in the process of that, he is, everything he knew about the tower is just being blown apart. It is just so tripped out. I mentioned this before, but it's tripped out in like a very Alice in Wonderland kind of way. I think the Tower of Babel is incredible. All the different floors are really interesting and unique, but for Sinlin to be the character who takes us through that experience has got to be one of the most confusing narrative decisions I think I've read in a very long time. There was a point when I was really thinking, I just hope his wife is gone. I hope she has truly just left this man. For me, Sinlin Ascends is just the perfect example of the most incredible premise, the coolest setting that just does absolutely nothing. This is kind of random, but next I'm gonna put The Long Game on this list by Ann Leckie, and this was a part of the Far Reaches short story collection. If you guys didn't know, every year for the past maybe like 3 years or so, Amazon has been releasing a science fiction short story collection with 6 different prominent sci-fi and fantasy authors. And the Far Reaches collection came out this past summer. And I think this is the 4th one, I want to say. And it included stories from, Ann Leckie, Nnedi Okorafor, Rebecca Roanhorse, Veronica Roth, John Scalzi and James S.A. Corey. And the collection as a whole was pretty solid. It's not my favorite of the ones that I've read, but it was solid. But this one, The Long Game, honestly, I'm a little bummed that this was my first experience with Ann Leckie. I still have not read Ancillary Justice, but it's on my shelf and I do want to get to it. Our main character is part of this like alien slug species, and they realize that their lifespan is really short. And so they go out and they basically try to find out why and like how they can improve their lifespan, and that is quite literally what it is. I thought this was definitely the weakest of the short story collection, but I am still excited to read more from Ann Leckie, but just I cannot believe that was my first experience. The next book making this list is good old Fourth Wing. You know, I stand by what I said earlier in the year about Fourth Wing. I don't despise this book. I genuinely think that Fourth Wing is a good story. Like, who doesn't love dragons? But it's also the kind of story that could really benefit from some stronger editing. And I'm not even just talking about from the writing standpoint, I'm talking about like developmental edits. There are a lot of things with the history of this world that don't make sense, the conflict that's happening, just even the fact that the children of rebels are allowed in your nation's war college. Not only that, but why are they writing the most dangerous creatures in your nation? Like, what questions is the editing team asking when they're reading the drafts of these books? With Fourth Wing, you can definitely tell that this is the author's first time writing fantasy. A lot of times when reading this book, I felt like I was being written down to. I would be comfortably in a scene, I would know what was going on, and I felt like so many things, so many unnecessary things were being reiterated to me and just kind of being spelled out in a way that didn't need to be. And that just carried on over the course of this entire book. I thought the way exposition was handled in this book was very clunky. I thought the dialogue and Violet's inner thoughts were very cringy. Despite the story itself being intriguing, it didn't make for the smoothest reading experience. So Fourth Wing was not for me, but it's definitely been an interesting phenomenon this year. The next book making this list is Promise of Blood by Brian McClellan, and this is the first book in the Powder Mage trilogy. This is another one that I really did not have a good time with. These have to be some of the worst written female characters I've probably ever read. When you're reading a lot of fantasy and sci-fi, you definitely come across some ridiculous female characters every now and then. A lot of times it comes off as just very eye-rolling, like, oh, another guy trying to write female characters. And you just kind of move on because maybe the story itself is actually pretty good. But with Promise of Blood, there's something almost like comical about how these characters are written. I've talked about this before, but one of the female characters in here is a cheater. The other one is a young woman who's almost raped twice. The other one is a wife and a mother who, she's not a prevalent character, but her husband, who is one of the main characters, kind of thinks about her every so often. And when he does, it's very much like, oh, she used to be this and she used to look like that, and you get the picture. And the other female character who was actually pretty interesting is a mute. And you know what? Inherently, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that. Promise of Blood is definitely not the first book to feature cheaters or, you know, a character who is a mute or sexual assault. But there's something about the way that it's done in here and the way that you just get the sense when you're reading it that there is nothing else to these characters outside of all of that. It just, it's so tired, in my opinion. It's not interesting to read, but I think it stands out so strongly and you just notice it a lot more because the male characters are also dry. I feel like when I got comfortable in this story and I knew more about the world and the magic system and I could really focus on the characters, I feel like I'm just searching for personality and it's nowhere to be had. It wasn't a good time for me, to be honest. I would much rather female characters not even be in a story than be written like that. The next book on this list is The Blade of Faith by David Dalglish. This is the first book in the Vagrant God series. This is another one that I just found to be incredibly bland. It didn't do a whole lot for me. This book just feels like it plays everything a little too safe. I think this book relies on a lot of fantasy tropes that we've seen time and time again, but it doesn't really do anything to distinguish itself, to set itself apart from those tropes, to make itself more interesting in light of those tropes. Our main character Cyrus, I just never found him to be interesting, and he went through some pretty heavy stuff when he was a child, and I was just like, I'm not connecting the way that I think I probably should be. And the ending of this was really interesting, and I think it sets up the second book really nicely, but I have no desire. This is a high epic fantasy story, and our main character is a young boy when he witnesses his parents killed and his god slain, and he's taken in by the rebel group in order to like train up and get strong enough where he can come back and take back what's rightfully his. And I just wish the reading experience of it was just a little bit more exciting. I also think the prose in here tries to lean on that traditional fantasy feel, but it also has some modern, you know, some modern things thrown in, and it just didn't work for me. I'm like, just pick one. So not my favorite read of the year, and I will definitely not be continuing on with the series. The next book making this list is The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes, and this is the first book in a series, and that's my big issue. Why is this a series? Of all the books I've read this year, this is the one I really feel like just wasted my time. The premise of it was so good. I was really enjoying the first half of this book. This has been compared to Knives Out, and it really does feel like that. But I think along the way, this just gets really wrapped up into, it's young adult, it gets wrapped up into the angst and the romance and the character things. All the different brothers are cute and that sort of thing. And there's all this money at stake that she has to fight for and, you know, solve these puzzles in order to get. And then it all builds up into what you think is going to be this really great crescendo. And it ends on the flattest note and sets up the second book. And I was just so annoyed. A few more pages could have wrapped this up and there would have been no need for a book two. Oh, this was so frustrating by the end of the book. I wish I had not picked this up, to be perfectly honest. In this, our main character is struggling to get by, and it turns out this billionaire has left pretty much his entire fortune to her. And the only way she can claim it is if she comes to his estate, moves in, and solves the puzzles that he's left behind. And it was all so interesting. I just don't know why it had to end that way and why there are 3 other books for that plot. I'm done. And then the last book making this list is The Blood Gift by Annie Davenport. This is the second and final book in the Blood Gift duology. When I talked about this book before, I'm pretty sure one of you mentioned in the comments that you thought this was supposed to be a trilogy. I was gonna dig a little more into that, but I forgot. But having now read The Blood Gift, I can tell that this feels like it should have been a trilogy. And it's unfortunate because you do see these other series that probably don't really need to be series, or, you know, trilogies that probably should just be a standalone. You see all this, and then you see a book like, or you see books like The Blood Trials and The Blood Gift, a story that just has so much potential, that is so intriguing, crammed into 2 books when it really should be spread across 3, maybe 4. That could be pushing it, but you can tell that this is a story that needs to expand a little bit. And cramming it into 2 books, I think, just does the story such a disservice, and it really affected the reading experience. I think this felt rushed. I think the pacing was a little off. I think the writing took a bit of a hit in this. It was angsty, and the romantic subplot and just that whole relationship and that dynamic and her thoughts about that relationship just really began to detract from what we needed to be doing. So yeah, I would have loved to see this spread across more than 2 books. Honestly, it's kind of sad when you think about how new authors are not given the space to expand their series, to, you know, grow their characters and let their writing mature over the course of the story. And then we just get sequels that feel rushed. This was definitely a disappointing read. And coming off of The Blood Trials, which is a book that I actually really enjoyed. I enjoyed the politics of the book. I loved how brutal it was. I wanted to see the world expand. And to come off of that into this second book, I think was just a bit of a letdown, and unfortunately is one of my least favorite reads of the year. So that is it for me, you guys. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. Let me know down in the comments what are some of your worst books, some of your most disappointing books of 2023. I want to hear about it, and I will see you guys in the next video. Take care.